In the late 19th century, European powers were carving up Africa in what is now known as the Scramble for Africa. At the Berlin Conference of 1884–85, European states formalized rules for colonial claims, spheres of influence, and trade. King Leopold II of Belgium, an ambitious monarch who had long desired colonial expansion, succeeded in securing formal recognition of his control over a vast swath of the Congo Basin. What became the Congo Free State was legally his private possession. Leopold presented his claim under the guise of philanthropy and civilizing mission, promising to end the slave trade, bring Christianity, build infrastructure, and improve the welfare of the local peoples. But from the outset, his intentions were economic. Ivory and other natural resources, and later rubber, would become the primary sources of wealth. At first, most of the extraction was in ivory. Agents of the Congo Free State, the Koenig's private administration, set up stations along the Congo River and tributary waterways. Local peoples were required to bring ivory as tribute. Where resistance occurred, force was used. As demand for rubber in Europe increased, especially in the 1890s, with industrialization and inventions like pneumatic tires, rubber became more lucrative than ivory. When King Leopold II realized the immense profits European industries were making from natural rubber, his intentions in the Congo shifted entirely. What had once been publicly presented as a humanitarian and scientific enterprise, the civilizing mission of ending slavery and bringing progress, mutated into one of the most ruthless extraction systems in modern history. By 1890, the rubber market in Europe was exploding. The invention of bicycle tires, the rise of automobiles, telegraph cables, and industrial belts all demanded vast quantities of natural rubber. Prices soared, and deep in the Congo Basin, one of the most rubber-rich regions on Earth, Leopold saw his opportunity. Between 1891 and 1892, Leopold issued several decrees that transformed the Congo Free State from a so-called free territory into his private economic machine. It stated that all land not under cultivation or not occupied by a recognized authority was now property of the state. In European legal language, this sounded administrative and harmless. But in the Congo, where people lived through communal land use, hunting, and forest gathering rather than fenced farms, it meant something else entirely. The state had just claimed ownership of almost the entire country. Villages suddenly found that the forests their ancestors had used for generations, their sources of food, water, medicine, and vines, were no longer theirs. Those forests now belonged to Leopold. Leopold divided vast portions of this newly state-owned territory among private companies that were either directly owned by him or controlled by his close associates in Belgium. These companies were called concessions, essentially private fiefdoms granted by royal favor. The most infamous among them was the Abir Congo Company, the Anglo-Belgian India Rubber Company, which received massive areas in the northern Congo. Another was the Société Anversoise du Commerce au Congo, the Antwerp Company, which dominated regions along the upper Congo River. In exchange for exclusive rights to extract rubber and ivory from their assigned territories, these companies paid Leopold a share of the profits, turning his private colony into a vast corporate network of extraction. Leopold's administration introduced a system that forced local communities to pay their taxes. These companies were called concessions, essentially private fiefdoms granted by royal favor. The most infamous among them was the Abir Congo Company, the Anglo-Belgian India Rubber Company, which received massive areas in the northern Congo. Another was the Société Anversoise du Commerce au Congo, the Antwerp Company, which dominated regions along the upper Congo River. In exchange for exclusive rights to extract rubber and ivory from their assigned territories, these companies paid Leopold a share of the profits, turning his private colony into a vast corporate network of extraction. Leopold's administration introduced a system that forced local communities to pay their taxes not in money, but in rubber. Every adult male in a village had to deliver a fixed amount of dried rubber at regular intervals, sometimes every 2 weeks, sometimes monthly. The quotas were calculated without regard for local conditions, whether rubber vines were nearby, whether the forests had been exhausted, or whether the population was already starving. It was effectively a death sentence disguised as a tax. Each village chief was held personally responsible for his community's quota. If the quota was met, the chief might receive trinkets, a few beads, a cloth, or a handful of salt. If the quota was not met, the punishments were catastrophic. The local administrator, usually a European officer, would dispatch armed soldiers from the Force Publique, Leopold's private colonial army. They arrived with rifles, chains, and notebooks. They would gather the villagers in the open square, read out the unpaid quota, and then begin the terror. Hostages taken, beatings, floggings, or executions. Children and women were often seized and held until their husbands or fathers brought back the demanded rubber. To the administration, this was encouragement. To the Congolese, it was slavery by another name. Collecting wild rubber in the Congo was nothing like working on a plantation. There were no cultivated rows of trees. The vines of Landolphia owariensis, the wild rubber plant, snaked high through the dense rainforest canopy. To find them, men had to trek for miles through swamps and thick jungle, cutting through undergrowth, avoiding leopards, snakes, and hostile patrols. Once they found a vine, they had to climb or slice it open, letting the milky latex ooze onto their skin. There were no containers, so men would smear the sticky latex on their arms and bodies, letting it dry into a crust. When they returned to camp, they would peel it off, along with their body hair and sometimes skin, creating open wounds that festered with infection. Each man carried perhaps a few kilograms of rubber, often just enough to satisfy the quota officer. But over time, the vines near the villages were stripped bare. They died or stopped producing latex, forcing villagers to go deeper into the forest, sometimes walking 10, 20, even 30 miles to find new vines. Many never came back. They were killed by exhaustion, wild animals, or soldiers who accused them of laziness. The Abir Congo Company was the most profitable and the most brutal. Its agents established fortified stations, each commanded by a European officer and a group of African sentries called capitas. Every station managed dozens of villages, each with a set monthly quota. Rubber was weighed, recorded, and shipped downriver to Leopoldville, then to Antwerp, where it made King Leopold a fortune. In some years, profits from Abir reached margins of 700 to 1,000%, all made possible by free labor and forced collection. The concession system blurred the line between government and company. The same men who enforced laws also enforced quotas. The same rifles used to keep order were used to punish villagers. By the mid-1890s, this had become a machine of terror powered by profit. Beyond the physical suffering, the rubber system destroyed entire ways of life. Men no longer farmed or hunted for food. They were too busy searching for vines. Women were left in the villages, starving, guarding children, or taken as hostages by soldiers. Communal ceremonies, songs, and ancestral rituals vanished under constant fear. Villages emptied out. Some fled deep into the forest. Others crossed into neighboring territories to escape the quotas. Those who remained learned a new reality. Their survival depended on the weight of a rubber ball. In the words of one Congolese elder, quoted decades later in missionary reports, "Before the white man came, we had our lives. We hunted, we fished, we were free. Now we only know the forest. We go in alive and come out dead." While the world believed Leopold was building a humanitarian colony, he was in reality operating the largest forced labor economy in Africa. He built railways, yes, but to move rubber, not people. He constructed telegraph lines, but for company orders, not communication. He banned the Arab slave trade, but replaced it with a European one. By 1895, the Congo Free State was no longer a colony in the moral sense. It was a corporation with borders, ruled by terror, sustained by quotas, and profitable beyond imagination. To enforce rubber quotas, Leopold used a private army/colonial force known as the Force Publique. This force was composed of European officers and African soldiers, often led by captains or sentries, sometimes African sub-officials known as capitas or similar, who had responsibility for enforcing quotas in villages. Perhaps the most infamous symbol of the rubber regime was that soldiers were required or encouraged to bring severed hands or other body parts, as proof of having killed or punished people who did not meet quotas or were resisting. In many cases, hands were cut off even if the person was not killed. This was part punishment, part terror tactic. Wives, children, relatives of rubber gatherers were taken as hostages. Sometimes soldiers would threaten to kill or harm them if quotas were not met. This made it near impossible for people to refuse or escape. If a village failed to deliver the required rubber, comparable failure could lead to its destruction. Houses burned, fields destroyed, and population killed or driven off. Some villages were completely wiped out. In addition to rubber collection, people were often pressed into forced labor to build roads, ferry rubber, or supply food and other needs of the administration, sometimes to support the Force Publique itself. Subsistence agriculture was undermined because people were taken from their homes and prevented from tending gardens or raising crops. This led to famine and breakdown of traditional livelihood. The forced labor, migration, famine, violence, and disruption of traditional life led to epidemics. People were displaced into inhospitable areas. Birth rates declined due to violence, scarcity, and social breakdown. Many died from starvation, disease, exhaustion. For years, the horrors inside the Congo Free State were kept hidden behind official reports and royal propaganda. King Leopold's government told Europe that everything was fine, that schools were being built, trade was growing, and that savage tribes were being civilized. But deep in the forests, millions were suffering. And slowly, stories began to escape. The first people to speak out were missionaries, mostly British and American, who lived among the Congolese and saw the truth every day. They saw villages burned down, men with their hands cut off, and children starving because their parents had been forced into the jungle to find rubber. These missionaries began writing letters back home, describing what they had witnessed. At first, few people believed them. It seemed impossible that a European king, who talked of civilization and Christian duty, could be responsible for such cruelty. But the letters kept coming. And soon, journalists and diplomats decided to investigate. One of the first major investigations was led by Sir Roger Casement, a British consul stationed in Africa. In 1903, the British government sent him to the Congo to find out if the rumors were true. Casement traveled by boat and on foot through several districts of the Congo Free State. He spoke with local villagers, missionaries, company agents, and soldiers. What he found shocked him. Casement wrote that villages had been wiped out for missing rubber quotas. He recorded testimonies from mothers whose children were taken as hostages, from men who had seen their wives and brothers shot, and from chiefs whose people had starved to death in the forest. He described the brutal punishments used by the Force Publique, the soldiers who enforced Leopold's rubber system, beatings, shootings, mutilations, and public executions. When Casement finished his investigation, he sent his report to the British government. It became known as the Casement Report, 1904. The report caused an international sensation. It was cold, factual, and based on direct observation, yet it painted one of the darkest pictures of colonial cruelty ever documented. Newspapers across Europe and America reprinted parts of it. People were horrified. For the first time, the world saw the Congo Free State for what it truly was. A kingdom built on human suffering. King Leopold could no longer ignore the growing outrage. At first, he called the reports lies and exaggerations, spread by jealous foreigners. But as pressure increased, from British politicians, church groups, and even some Belgian citizens, he was forced to act. In 1905, Leopold set up an official commission of inquiry in the Congo. He hoped it would clear his name. Instead, it confirmed nearly everything Casement had said. The commission interviewed hundreds of witnesses, European officers, company workers, and Congolese villagers. Their stories matched the reports. Mutilations, mass killings, villages burned, and people worked to death in the forests. Even some of Leopold's own officials admitted that the system was corrupt and inhumane. When the findings were published, it became clear that the king could no longer hide behind his lies. His so-called Free State was now known as one of the most brutal regimes in history. While governments argued, a few brave individuals dedicated their lives to exposing the truth. One of the most important was E.D. Morel, a British shipping clerk who worked for a company trading with the Congo. He noticed something strange. Ships going to the Congo were loaded with guns and ammunition, but when they returned to Europe, they were filled with rubber and ivory, not normal trade goods. To Morel, this meant one thing: the Congo's riches were being stolen by force. He quit his job and began a public campaign against Leopold's regime. Morel wrote articles, organized meetings, and gave speeches across Britain. He founded the Congo Reform Association, one of the first large-scale human rights movements in modern history. At the same time, a missionary named Alice Seeley Harris began showing photographs she had taken in the Congo. Her pictures showed men and children with severed hands, families in mourning, and empty villages. These photos were some of the first images ever used in a human rights campaign. They were shown in churches, schools, and lecture halls across Europe and America, proof that could not be denied. The combination of Morel's journalism, Casement's report, and Harris's photographs created a global movement. Suddenly, the Congo Free State was on everyone's lips. Newspapers called it the greatest crime of the century. By 1906, protests had erupted in Britain, the United States, France, and even Belgium itself. Missionaries published books, politicians demanded inquiries, and ordinary citizens signed petitions. Leopold tried everything to repair his image. He donated money to charities, funded new public buildings in Belgium, and hired publicists to write flattering stories about his humanitarian work. But it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming. Under constant international pressure, Leopold was finally forced to hand over his private colony to the Belgian government in 1908. It was the end of the Congo Free State, but not the end of suffering. The new Belgian Congo still used forced labor for many years, though it was now subject to more outside supervision. Historians still debate exactly how many people died during Leopold's rule, but all agree that the number was in the millions. Some researchers estimate 1.5 to 3 million deaths. Others believe the number could be as high as 10 to 13 million, depending on how disease, starvation, and displacement are counted. The population of the Congo was nearly cut in half. Villages disappeared, families were wiped out, and entire ethnic groups were shattered. Many of those who survived were left traumatized, scarred, and impoverished for generations. The Congo scandal marked a turning point in global awareness. For the first time, photographs, journalism, and public pressure forced a colonial power to change its policies. It showed that the world could hold leaders accountable for crimes committed thousands of miles away. People began to understand that civilization could not be built on blood and suffering. And though Leopold never faced trial, his legacy was permanently stained. When he died in 1909, crowds in Brussels jeered during his funeral procession instead of mourning. They knew the truth. The easier rubber vines near posts were depleted. Quotas remained high, meaning people had to go further into forests. Yields dropped, costs of collection rose. This led to more brutality as overseers tried to maximize returns. The global exposure of the atrocities increased, thanks to missionary photographs, letters, media, reports like Casement, and pressure from other governments. This made Leopold's position increasingly untenable internationally. Belgian parliamentarians, socialists, missionaries, and foreign governments criticized Leopold privately and publicly. The moral cost, negative press, and diplomatic pressure forced Leopold to make some concessions. Some reforms attempted, some officials punished, but often delayed or superficial. Finally, in 1908, the Belgian state formally annexed the Congo Free State, transforming it into the Belgian Congo, thereby ending Leopold's private ownership. This was partly a response to the scandal, but many forced labor systems and poor treatment continued under Belgian colonial rule, though under more oversight. A man called David Ngohe from the Bolia people gave testimony in the Casement Report around 1903 to 1904. He describes that at Basingil, if the rubber from a village was of poor quality or split, agents would reject it, then punish villagers, sometimes by shooting some among them. Villagers were sent back into the forest to gather more rubber. Subsistence food crops and garden produce were forbidden. They could not eat manioc, plantains, palm nuts from their own trees, or sugar cane. Those were reserved for state agents. He saw people mutilated, hands cut off, serious wounds inflicted that were expected to kill. The notorious protocol of authorities requiring proof of bullets was expended. Because munitions were expensive, the Force Publique often demanded severed hands as proof of kills, or to show that bullets had been used legitimately rather than wasted. This led to hands being collected even when the person was not killed. The Abir Congo Company posts. In concession territory controlled by Abir, the rubber vines, Landolphia vines, were being destructively harvested. Villages that were near posts had their vines harvested out. Sometimes vines were cut entirely rather than tapped, leading to rapid depletion. Efforts to regulate these methods, e.g. orders to plant replacement vines, were often ineffective. Criminal punishments for unmet quotas included not only mutilation and killing but hostage-taking and sexual violence. Women and children were sometimes held until quotas were met, used as leverage. The cumulative human cost was colossal. The violence, forced labor, famine, collapse of social structures, displacement, and disease worked together to cause a demographic catastrophe. The population declined in many regions. Birth rates dropped. Many people died. Large tracts of land were abandoned. People fled into remote forests or across borders. Estimates of deaths. As noted, scholars differ, but some credible estimates say between 1.5 million and 13 million people died in that period because of all factors combined. Some of these figures include not just direct violence, but disease, famine, and social disruptions. Psychological and cultural damage. Families torn apart, entire villages destroyed, traditional authorities undermined. Also loss of land, interruption of agriculture, and environmental damage from overharvesting of rubber vines, deforestation, etc. Some aspects are worth noting in terms of understanding how Leopold and his agents justified or tried to escape responsibility. Leopold often claimed ignorance of the worst abuses, denying that hand amputations were systematic punishments, or suggesting they were carried out only by rogue agents. But investigations and internal reports, as well as documented chains of command, showed that many abuses were known or could be known. The rubber revenue was enormous, and the colonial administration was deeply dependent on income from rubber and ivory. Oversight was minimal. Local agents had large discretionary powers. Also, the concession companies were profit-driven with little concern for human cost. The state's laws permitted or turned a blind eye. While there were critics, there was also complicity. European markets demanded rubber, companies and private investors profited. Some colonial powers did not want to challenge Leopold's claim because of diplomatic concerns. The change came only when the moral cost, press exposure, and diplomatic pressure made it politically costly to ignore. When the Belgian state took over in 1908, the Congo became officially a colony, the Belgian Congo. The worst excesses of Leopold's private rubber regime diminished, but forced labor, racial discrimination, extraction of resources continued, though under somewhat less brutal oversight. Policies of infrastructure, education, etc. were introduced, but benefits to indigenous peoples were minimal relative to the cost. The long-term effects included massive population loss, cultural dislocation, weakened political structures, deep social trauma, memory of violence and loss, which have continued to shape Congolese identity, politics, and national narratives. Environmental depletion in some rubber zones, and neglect of sustainable development in many areas. The Congo case also became a pioneering case of international human rights activism. Photographs, media campaigns, diplomacy, moral pressure. It is often cited as an early example of campaigns against colonial abuses and for imperial justice. How many died? Disentangling death by direct violence versus famine and disease is difficult. Different scholars produce different estimates. The lower bound is often around 1 to 2 million. The higher end sometimes reaches 10 to 13 million. Often the narrative focuses on European brutality. But there was resistance, evasion, negotiation. Many Congolese attempted to avoid rubber quotas, flee, sabotage, or use traditional authorities to mediate. The extent and forms of resistance are less well documented but crucial. Leopold's personal role, Belgian state's role, company shareholders, European markets, missionary complicity or opposition, all are parts of the moral calculus. Also, how much could Leopold have known, what oversight existed, etc. After Belgian annexation, many abusive labor practices continued, but there were also reforms. Understanding what changed, what persisted, and why is important. The crimes of this period left lasting scars. In the modern Democratic Republic of the Congo, colonial history remains deeply relevant for politics, identity, development, and international relations. Questions of apology, reparations, and historical recognition are still alive. The atrocities of the Congo Free State under Leopold II represent one of the most brutal chapters of colonial extraction in human history. Over the course of some 2 decades, what began as a colonial venture promising civilization turned into a regime of terror, forced labor, and mass suffering. Rubber, a commodity once thought innocuous, became the instrument through which millions of lives were sacrificed. The scale of cruelty, mutilation, murder, famine, displacement, on top of environmental destruction and cultural loss, left a legacy that continues to resonate. In 1908, Leopold's rule formally ended when the Belgian state took over, but the consequences of those years had already reshaped the Congo irreversibly.